Blockbuster, the winner of Adweek's Creative Podcast of the Year, returns.
Film is a hobby, not a career.
I know, Dad.
James Cameron? James Cameron.
A movie for your ears.
James Cameron.
What, me? No.
This isn't what I envisioned.
It's a bad idea, okay?
About the world's most ambitious filmmaker.
It has to be perfect.
Just say, I'm the king of the world.
What? Why would I yell that?
Blockbuster. Get it wherever you get your podcasts.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's episode of the Shelved Film Podcast. I am your host, Jeremy Meyer. So today is maybe one of my favorite episodes of the podcast because it's one I've been trying to get set up for a while with a friend of mine who I actually made through I guess not through the podcast, but technically through the internet. Today's guest is Joe Khachadurian, which I hope I'm pronouncing your name right, Joe. He's a man who works in the comics industry. He has his own comic identity, Stunt, which we plug at the end of the show. But we kind of met and connected through, we were both Kevin Smith fans, and him being in comics, he had long ago mentioned that, we should talk about Kevin Smith's Green Hornet comic book, which was originally written as a movie script. At one point, Kevin was going to direct a Green Hornet movie, and as he puts it, even in the intro of the book, that he pussed out in directing it. Basically just when push came to shove, and I actually heard him tell part of this story on a podcast recently, that he literally went to merchandise meetings before they had even written the script, and he was just like, this just seems wrong, and it wasn't the way he normally does things. So he just was like, I don't think I want to direct this, but they convinced him to write the movie instead, and he turned it in, and eventually it just never happened. And the script sat on the shelf for a long time until eventually he was approached with the idea of hey, why don't we turn that script into a comic book? And so they did. And this actually happened with another one of his scripts for the $6 Million Man, I think. They turned that one into a comic book as well. And I'd always heard that the Green Hornet comic was very good. And I have delved into covering comics or scripts turned into comics recently. We did the RoboCop 2 one by Frank Miller. I actually just finished reading the William Gibson Alien 3 comic based on that script that I'll be turning into an episode in the near future here. But I love the idea of retooling old scripts into comics, and I guess they're doing the original Alien screenplay for the first movie as a comic right now. The first 2 issues are out, and I've picked that up, so that'll also be covered as an episode in the future. It's fun doing the comic episodes because reading it is a lot more fun because it is a comic, and it's easier for you guys to go pick that up and read along if you want. So keep an eye out for those issues dropping because that will be covered in the future as well. But yeah, so me and Joe, we sat down and we talked about the Green Hornet script, and we also watched the Green Hornet movie that did come out with Seth Rogen, and we give our opinions on that, which for me it was the first time seeing it because I have no experience with the Green Hornet. Reading this comic was my first interaction with the property, other than knowing that it exists, But I had a lot of fun covering this one. I had a lot of fun talking to Joe. I think it is one of my favorite episodes, and I can't wait to have Joe back on. We're definitely going to cover Kevin Smith's other script turned to comic and stuff like that. So I hope you guys enjoy the show. So let's just get the plugs out of the way. We have new merch. We have 3 new shirts on our merch store inspired by the 3 of my favorite movies. So you get the podcast title in the movie treatment. We got a Back to the Future, we got a Predator, and we have a Matrix design. So you can find those on our Below the Collar store at Shelved Film Podcast. Just search Below the Collar Shelved Film Podcast, or I have the links on the Twitter and Instagram, which you can find at Shelved Podcast for both of those. We also have the Patreon, patreon.com/shelved. So you can always go and support the show over there. There's cool rewards if you want to be a guest on the show. Like every month, there's a reward for that. Also, I finally got my YouTube URL situation worked out. I had been struggling to get my custom URL for a long time, and YouTube was not being cooperative because I had like an old URL that I was trying to get rid of and then get the new one, and it for some reason just would never allow me, and I decided to give it another shot like a week ago, and it finally just worked. So you can find the show at youtube.com/shelvedfilmpodcast. So I know there's some people who watch it on YouTube and or listen to it on YouTube. There's nothing to watch. And that should make it a little easier for people to find. I'm also still working on some YouTube content. I just don't want to start dropping stuff until it's ready. And then I'm going to see how people feel about it. And if they like the content I put up, then I'm going to produce more of that stuff. So keep your eye open for the YouTube stuff. There should be some coming in the future. But why don't we stop delaying and get to one of my favorite episodes of the podcast where me and Joe are going to talk about the Green Hornet. Well, hey, man, I'm glad we could finally put this together. I know we've talked about this for a long time.
Me too. I've been actually excited about this for a long time, too.
Yeah. You seem obviously a lot more familiar with the source material than I am. I've always been aware of the Green Hornet. I've never seen the show. I never saw the movie when it came out. I've always just kind of known that, like, oh, that's like the show that Bruce Lee came from. It was like the Dozier Batman series, but I never stumbled across it in all my years. And I was always familiar with this story of, Kevin Smith wrote the script that became a comic, but I never got around to reading it. And I don't even remember how it came up between us, like a long time ago. I think it might have been because you post on your Twitter, you're always sharing a lot of like comic cover stuff, and maybe I had mentioned that, like, oh, I've never read that or seen that or whatever, and we just got to talking about it.
Yeah, I feel like you had mentioned something about the script itself, and I had said, I think I responded, and I don't recall if I heard it on one of your earlier podcasts or if it was just something you had tweeted, but I remember responding and saying, oh, they had turned into a comic, and you were like, yeah, that's what I was going to analyze. But good point. I don't remember how the conversation exactly started.
Yeah, but it's been one of those things like, oh, yeah, we're going to do this one day, and then I have a super crazy work schedule, and every time it was like, oh, maybe this weekend, it was like, oh, no, it turns out I'm working this weekend, and it's finally had the time.
All right.
But so
it is the perfect time, too, considering the news.
Oh, God, yeah. I mean, yeah, that's something I guess we could touch on, because this was published by Dynamite Comics. And
correct.
Dynamite Comics not really in the news for a good reason right now.
Correct.
Yeah, which you're more in tune with this stuff than I am because you have a comic book, you work in comics. So for me, just like as a fan, keeping up on it, it's just the Comicsgate bullshit and all these man babies out there crying, and Dynamite decided to just go all in on that.
I don't understand what Nick Barucci's doing, given all the bad press associated with Comicsgate and Van Sciver. Being on his podcast or his YouTube show, I'd say, a couple weeks ago, and then I think they're not so much as publishing a Comicsgate cover as they are promoting the Indiegogo fan cover or something. But still, it just feels dirty. Those guys are a mix of just angry little trolls all the way up to, hateful racists.
Yeah, and very misogynistic group.
There's just nothing really virtuous about the way they behave, despite their claims. They harass people relentlessly, mainly based on gender, sexuality, or ethnicity. And they came after me a couple years ago.
Oh, really? I didn't know you had personally tangled with them.
Oh yeah, it was a very short amount of time, and it was over something very silly, but mainly because I had alluded to in Identity Stunt Volume 1 and Issue 2, one of the cops makes a comment about, Sam's ethnicity being Middle Eastern and makes a comment about refugees. And then one of them kind of took offense to that. Looking at a review, they just posted something. And that led to some accusation of racism due to my Middle Eastern. It was just ridiculous, and it's obvious they bait people into getting angry for their own entertainment. So,
very much so.
There's nothing cool about them. There's nothing funny about it. I do have some friends who think some aspects of Comicsgate are humorous or edgy.
Yeah.
But I completely disagree. Like, they're just annoying trolls who.
I deal with a similar.
Get a rise out of people.
Yeah, I deal with a similar couple of friends that say the same thing about like our president administration right now. Like, oh, it's just funny. Like, is it? No, not at all. Like,
yeah, exactly.
Like, yeah, it's a lot of Comicsgate stuff stems from Gamergate, which was pretty much the same thing happening in video games. And I was a video game journalist at one point, but was kind of getting out of it as that stuff was happening. So I didn't luckily have to deal with any of it, but just seeing it on my timeline all the time is super gross. And it's just a bunch of bad people saying and doing bad things. And I just mostly try to ignore it. But it's a really interesting thing to see a publisher kind of getting behind it in the way they did.
That's the thing. Even seeing Shane Davis on that was, a bit of a disappointment. He drew the Superman Earth 1 books, which I really enjoyed.
Oh, I love those.
A lot of Batman stuff. Yeah, with Winnick, when Winnick wrote Batman. So it is a shame, but, I understand people, being disappointed in Dynamite, and I would say I am disappointed in Dynamite. I don't know that I'm going to, claim that everybody who's ever been associated with Dynamite needs to denounce them, to that degree, which is also what I'm seeing on Twitter.
Yeah, I see a lot of that
reaction. But it does definitely make me less inclined to purchase their books. Not that I've been purchasing much. But like I admit, I love The Boys. I love the Green Hornet stuff when it comes and goes. I love their Lone Ranger stuff, primarily by Brett Matthews, not some of the other stuff. But it's a shame.
Yeah, and for me, it's like obviously a lot of the creators themselves probably don't support what the publisher is saying. So on one hand, it's like, yes, I'm supporting the publisher, but more importantly, I am supporting the creator. And I honestly don't think I have a lot of Dynamite stuff. Like, I have these Green Hornet books, but I got these. Most of my stuff's digital nowadays, and I got them on a sale. And I do have the actual book for this one though. But I don't know if I actually own a lot of Dynamite stuff. For me, it's mostly the big two, and then like Image and stuff like that.
I did. I own all the Kevin Smith stuff in print. I've got a couple of boys' books in print, but I also bought most of those digitally, and then some of the Lone Ranger stuff, but not much else. To your point, the Bionic Man, because that was Kevin Smith.
Oh yeah.
But I did buy like a $15 Dynamite Heroes bundle a while ago that I actually forgotten about, and that's actually where I got all these digital copies of the Green Hornet. I'd totally forgotten that Phil Hester actually kept writing the book after Kevin Smith's 10 issues had ended.
Yeah,
so
I actually noticed that.
So we can talk about that later too.
Yeah, because when I finished Volume 2, which Volume 1 and Volume 2 cover Kevin's entire script, I signed up for Comixology Unlimited, so they have like a bunch of free stuff you just borrow. And Volume 3 was available to borrow. So after I finished Volume 2, I'm like, you know what? I just hit the borrow tab on it. I was like, I'm going to keep reading this series. Like, because I was going to say, just, I guess, to get into it, I really enjoyed these first two.
Yeah, I absolutely enjoyed it, too. Just to answer your first question about my history with the character, I'll be honest, it wasn't that deep. I mean, my first exposure was during reruns of the Batman 66 show when it crossed over with the Green Hornet.
Mm-hmm.
And then at that point, I just sort of became familiar with the character, and he was a pulp hero. In the early 90s, when there was, just millions of comics being published, there was, I think, Now Books or First Publishing put out Green Hornet. I'm pretty sure that's where I first came across Patrick Zurcher's artwork, too.
Mm-hmm.
But in my head, he was always like from the world of the Shadow or Dick Tracy.
Yeah.
It wasn't really until college when I went to not a local con. I went to college in San Diego. We drove to LA for some random con back then, like a basement con, basically. And we bought a couple of bootlegs of the Green Hornet Batman crossovers. They had made little movies, mini movies on DVD.
Yeah.
And those I enjoyed. And what I liked was that the Green Hornet wasn't quite as campy as Batman. He took itself a little bit more seriously, which is what I didn't like about the Seth Rogen film in some ways, and we can talk about that.
Yeah,
too.
we'll get into that.
But it wasn't really until I read that. Yeah, and it wasn't until I read that Kevin Smith was actually gonna, be writing and directing a Green Hornet film that I really got, interested in the character, and then that fell apart. And when the comic came out, I was all over that. Like, just given the passing interest and respect for the character, and then my love of Kevin Smith, I was excited. And honestly, I really like this idea of taking unused film scripts and turning them into comics, which is what they did with the Bionic Man and Alien 3, and I think they were doing that with Predator, but Dark Horse just lost the license. So,
yeah.
Anyway, not to go on a tangent there, but I do like
RoboCop
this
was
idea.
another one. They did Frank Miller's old RoboCop as a...
Oh, right, the Miller stuff. I've got that. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's sitting on my bookshelf, too. Yep, that's a great one.
Yeah, I agree. I love
So,
the idea
yeah, I mean-
of doing the comics off the scripts. Like, I wish that was more of a thing. One of my favorite ideas was they always kicked around continuing like the Tim Burton Batman in comics, and that's like my dream.
Yes, absolutely. I think Joe Khachadurian posted like a lot of design work he had done for like a potential digital comic, but it didn't go anywhere. Like, you should have done that, even just like a miniseries or something.
Yeah, I would just love to see how they would interpret some of those other villains that they never did in the like Burton style.
Mm-hmm. Did you see his take on the Billy D. Williams version of Two-Face?
I think that did cross my
Tommy Lee
Twitter.
Jones?
I think that did cross my Twitter timeline at some point. But yeah, I would have loved to have seen that stuff. But yeah. Yep. So I mean, even that much is definitely way more familiarity than I have. Like I said before, I was like, I know the character. I had heard of the script before. Never even saw the Batman crossover stuff. But so like going into this, I wasn't really sure. Like it was also one of those things like I was kind of putting it off for a while because I'm like, what if it's boring? And I gotta say, like immediately after the first issue, I was really in on this. I love the idea. And something I thought of as I was like kind of wrapping up the book is I often think one of my favorite attempts to reboot a franchise was the 2009 Star Trek. In the sense that I was not a Star Trek fan, and I watched that movie and I was like really blown away by it. But like knowing what I knew,
absolutely the same.
Yeah, exactly. And like what I knew about it is like, okay, they did a good job of honoring what was there, but making it their own. And I think this is kind of the same thing.
Yeah, it is. Very much so. And I'm pretty sure you've seen Jay and Silent Bob Reboot.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, I saw it finally.
Yeah, so you know that one scene where they're in Brody's comic shop and they're arguing about the definition of what was it, a reboot, or what was the other?
A reboot or a remake?
Reboot or a remake?
Yeah.
Yes. And that's funny because I thought that same argument could fit this script because it was clearly intended to be a sequel to the show.
Yeah.
And you could see that, and I think the reason why we liked it so much, despite some of its flaws in both storytelling and construction, which we can discuss also, is it was A, very charming. Like, you really liked the characters.
Yeah.
And B, Kevin Smith's love for the characters really came across as well.
100%. I definitely got the sense, with me not knowing much of reading about them, or not knowing much about them as I was reading it, I definitely felt that the person handling the material knew exactly what they wanted out of it, but was still able to like I love the idea that it's his son is becoming the Green Hornet. So it's like you are getting an origin story, but it does take place after the show. Like that, all that stuff can still be included.
Exactly, and the opening scene being sort of the Green Hornet's last stand and all that. I like that. You could tell that Kevin had really put a lot of thought into how to really tie in the old stuff with the new. And then we can go into full-on spoilers, right? At this point, I don't think we have to worry about much, correct?
No, yeah. Okay. I mean, that's the whole thing is running through it, so.
Okay, awesome. I love, though, that Kato sort of became, like, the father figure. That was an interesting dynamic, the elder Kato. And I would be curious to see who they would have cast in the film. Because I got some inkling of who they would have cast for some of the other characters. But, yeah, I really like the fact that Kato sort of got the chance to shine and train Britt Reid Jr. To be the new Green Hornet. And, even though Britt Reid Jr. had an element of goofiness to him, the fact that, he was the original Green Hornet's son, and in theory, the great-grandson of the Lone Ranger, he had that in his blood. And he also, they really did it. They had a passing comment about Britt Reid Jr.'s, master's degree in journalism, which I don't even know if that's a real thing. And some jiu-jitsu black belts and
they established that he at least makes sense that he could learn to get the skills that he does.
Exactly, which I didn't really get from the movie we got with Seth Rogen.
No,
that was missing.
Yeah, I will definitely say the Kevin version is a lot better than the movie that eventually came out. I literally just finished the movie like 30 minutes ago, and it honestly, I always thought I think I would kind of like it, but it really did become hard to sit through towards the end. Like the last 20 minutes, I think are actually a lot of fun, but just the setup of all the characters,
I agree.
And there's no real reason why they would decide to jump into crime fighting. It's just like, they go out and have a crazy night, and then they're like, hey, let's just do this. But in the comic book, there's like a clear motivation. Exactly,
that ties into an earlier case with the original Green Hornet's last his last stand or his last case with Kato, and that's a really good point. I completely agree. And that's kind of why I said you could feel Kevin's love in the story, and it was charming. I didn't like any of the characters in the movie. None of them were really charming. I appreciated Kato's aloofness and skills, and he was probably the character I found most interesting.
I would agree. And Christoph Waltz, just because it was Christoph Waltz, and he was just kind of doing his thing.
Yeah. But even he just phoned it in. His primary motivation was he wanted to be the leader of all the gangs in L.A. for no reason. And the thing he kept going back to is how to become scarier.
Yeah.
And it just felt like very little thought was put into it. It was almost soulless. It had its moments, and I agree the end was, a lot more fun than some of the other stuff. Mm-hmm. But it lacked it was uninspired. I guess that's one good way of putting it. And Seth Rogen, I just could not buy him as an action hero.
No, not at all. Like, I really like him. I think he's actually a very good actor, but this was just misguided from the start, maybe, is the way to look at it. And even on, a production level, there was, it doesn't look super good. Like, even a lot of night filming shots, and a lot of it's a little too dark. Like, it could have maybe used a more stylized look. And they have those weird moments where, Kato kicks a guy, and the picture, extends or whatever. There's, cool ideas there,
well,
but it never...
Know why?
No, I don't.
It was initially in 3D. The movie came out during the 3D craze. So they're trying to figure out a way to make the Green Hornet 3D. So they interjected all this bizarre stuff. It didn't it kind of looked cool, but when you think about it, you're like, but I don't understand why that happened.
Yeah, I guess looking at it outside of that time period. Yeah, that's bad.
Right. And I agree that didn't translate well.
Yeah, because I guess I forgot. I don't even remember when this movie came out actually, and it would have been all in the middle of that, and that every movie that was coming out in 3D was doing stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, like the Kevin version, just like you said, it makes the characters so likable. I love the character, like I love the whole "the sins of our fathers" like theme to it. The bad guy is also somebody whose father was taken down by the Green Hornet. The good guy is the son of the Green Hornet, and like it's a really you can kind of look at it, it's like, oh, the story is a little not. I don't want to use the word cliche, but that's for lack of a better word, I guess. Like you can see the story.
Well, it's cliche. Yeah, it's cliche in an almost Shakespearean fashion. Like, you know what I mean? Like, this is like the Hamlet approach to villainy. So, I agree. Like, you could kind of see it coming, and that was actually part of the plot, where like both of them figured out the other was the bad guy up just because that's what they were doing. So I thought that was kind of funny, despite maybe potentially being a bit lazy.
But like you said, like the fact that it is. Sorry, just to say, like the fact that it is a little Shakespearean, as you said, is like kind of what makes it work. Like, okay, you know what the deal is, but it's so well crafted, it feels like a classic. Like, even though if it had came out like a modern classic. Right.
Do you want to? Should we walk through the story for the audience and kind of go like?
Yeah, I mean,
beats? How do you want to do it?
Generally, with something like this, I always recommend like, oh, you should check it out before listening to the episode. But I think we just kind of like talk through the stuff as we get to it. But yeah, so like you said, we have the opening action scene, which I really like, and then we cut to like our character introduction stuff. Okay, this is something I actually was really confused by that. Not knowing the source material, do him and his dad have the same name?
Yeah.
Okay.
So I think the reason why he did that is the Green Hornet's name is Britt Reid. So in order to facilitate an older Britt Reid and a younger Britt Reid, you've just got Britt Reid Sr. and Britt Reid Jr.
Okay, I wasn't sure because I guess in the original material there was no son, so and they never referred to him as like a junior. I just got confused a little bit, but watching the movie, how everyone was calling him Britt as well, I figured that must have been the case.
Yep.
But yeah, like I love the whole opening of like him coming back and telling his wife that like I'm done, like this is over, and then seeing him as an older man running his newspaper and like still kind of trying to keep the legacy of like protecting the city alive, but just through print is kind of fun. And getting the setup with the mayor, who's the former DA. Again, you see it coming a mile away. Because I think it's the first issue where his dad gets killed, right? Or is that the second one?
It's actually the third.
Oh, is it? Wow. Oh, I guess it is spread across 10 issues. So.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting because like in a normal script, by the 25-minute mark would be that scene, but a comic book is usually like 20-some pages. But they really extend the movie minutes across the issues. I found that kind of interesting.
Yeah, I like that too, and that's where I like that Phil Hester was sort of brought in, and I'm pretty sure all he did was take Kevin Smith's script and say, okay, so here's this scene. How am I going to break it down into pages, and how do I break that down into panels? And then he kind of just adapted it, which got me curious about there are certain pages that just have captions, instead of dialogue, which is strange because you don't get that in a movie. So I'm wondering. Because I know Kevin Smith said he came back and did a little bit more with the comic. So I'm wondering if that was where Kevin Smith came and added stuff.
I think you're right because a lot of that stuff does kind of read as like the non-dialogue parts of a movie screenplay that they maybe just kind of retweaked into like narration.
That's a good point. Maybe he took Kevin Smith's descriptive text and put it. Yeah, that's a good point.
Yeah, that's kind of how it came off to me, is that he kind of rewrote that descriptive text a little bit into just like some sort of narration into like, oh, here's like kind of what's going on. Because it only happens like a handful of times throughout the entire 2 volumes.
Right. And that's, yeah, exactly. And it's just it just got me thinking, because I'm working on a script now, which I'll be talking about soon. I can't say publicly yet. Ooh. But I only had, it's for a publisher's character, but I only had 6 pages, and I'm trained in screenwriting, so I'm not big on using captions unless it's just to establish location and date and time. But, if you've only got 6 pages to work with, I realize how much more information you can convey to a reader when you do throw, like, a narrative caption in there. So I can understand why it's used. It just got me curious to see how much of those elements were Kevin Smith and how much of those elements were Phil Hester, who's a great writer, which is why I'm actually kind of looking forward now to keep reading after the initial 10.
Yeah, in the art, I should also point out, of the book is fantastic, and those Alex Ross covers are incredible.
Yeah, agreed on both counts. The fact that Alex Ross was doing covers for a Kevin Smith book is pretty funny. I'm not sure if you're aware, they had a bit of a feud going back in the early 2000s.
I am not aware of this.
Late 90s. Yeah, it wasn't a big deal. Kevin Smith had little mini feuds with everybody, including Warren Ellis.
Yeah.
But it's cool to see them reconcile over the Green Hornet, which is kind of a great fit for both of them. But yeah, Jonathan Lau's art is solid, and he's who he went back to, and Phil Hester, for the Bionic Man as well.
Yeah, I would have to shout out the art specifically in the fight scenes, because like a lot of fight scenes in comics can be a little just like it's mostly like a lot of dialogue happening at the same time, and that's handling the storytelling.
Mm-hmm.
But he actually does a lot of good storytelling just through animating the fights, especially with the fight scenes with the female Kato, which again is also one of my favorite parts of this story.
I love that. I totally agree. I love the fact that it was Kato's daughter, and she was just as capable. I did not like, though, that her name was Mulan.
Yeah.
That just seemed like what every white person thinks a tough Asian girl's name is going to be.
I agree. And I want to, I guess we can use this time right now to shout out a couple of the other, like, Kevin Smith-isms, I want to say.
Right.
Which is, there are a couple moments while reading this where I'm like, oh, Kevin, or just like, of course that's like what he said, and that is one of them. And another one is where a gangster is talking about something and he says like, oh, that's tits, man. I'm like, oh, you're the only person in the world I've ever heard talk like that.
Yeah.
And then
and then even
go ahead. No,
I was going to say at the end regarding Mulan, when it turns out that she is LGBTQ.
I actually like that.
I thought that was awesome, but I did not like the way it was presented.
Yes. What does he say? Oh, he's just like, chicks, really? Like, he was like super surprised and almost like kind of annoyed.
Exactly. And then I couldn't get this girl, and so she's I don't know.
Yeah.
I just wish they had introduced that aspect of her in a slightly less Kevin Smithy way, I suppose.
Yeah, like
but
the
idea
again, that it's not a big
deal. Chasing
deal.
Amy.
That's true. The idea that it's kind of treated as not a big deal is kind of cool. Like, oh, like she's a lesbian, that's cool. But it's the way Britt talks to her about it, like the dialogue specifically. Is like, oh, it's just so like rough, especially now, like looking back on, like maybe back then it might not have came off so bad. Maybe that's why it passed an editor or something like that. But definitely reading it in 2020, it's like, oh, this, you could have handled this so much better.
That is a big part of it, man. I agree with you. I think when this piece was written, it wouldn't have been quite as jarring potentially. But and the other thing is, I totally agree. I love that it wasn't a big deal. But in some ways, the very last splash page was them leaping into action, and Green Hornet's last words were, chicks, really? And I was like, oh, why is that going to be the last thing you say?
I really wish that was kind of just a blank splash page.
Saying. Right. They could have just said nothing, right? Or let's roll, Kato, or something like that.
Yeah, that's all you needed.
But, so let's not. I don't want to, keep beating that dead horse. But yeah, that annoyed me a little bit. And I think you were just going to say something else.
I was just going to point out the thing that I so blatantly missed that you pointed out to me is that the character that is 100% written to be Jay Muse.
Yes, and the fact that he had to be a Kato, so they made him half Asian because only Katos are allowed to work on the Black Beauty.
Yeah.
Which I was just like, wow, man, That's quite a stretch just to get Jason Mewes in there. It reminded me a little bit, not quite as badass. I don't know if you ever saw Transformers 4, where they have to sidebar from the whole film to explain why there's a guy dating an underage girl. Yep. It's a little bit like that, just not quite as cringeworthy.
Yeah. Yeah, that movie is very bad.
Yeah.
But yeah, like, I was gonna say, for the readers, for the listeners, Jason Mewes was written in as the mechanic for the Black Beauty, and they named him Clutch. But since only Katos are allowed to work on the Black Beauty, Clutch Kato, who looks 100% like Jason Mewes, is half Caucasian, half Asian cousin of the Mulan Kato character, and they had to take the time to explain that piece in order to justify the character. So that sort of thing is a pet peeve of mine in cinema. Yeah, it's completely unnecessary. And, I understand he's always trying to help his boy out, but it's one of those ones where it's like, he doesn't have to be in this one. It's okay. And them
or
going out of
somebody else.
Yeah. You don't need to force him into a role where you have to also try to explain his ethnicity that he clearly doesn't have.
Yeah, I agree.
But yeah, it's like there's a lot of those, or a few of those things that it's like these are the Kevin Smith things that he's there's also like some sex jokes that come out of like weird inappropriate times, like in the opening scene when Britt gets back with his wife and somebody makes a joke about, oh, well, you're not getting it in tonight or something like that, and it's like it doesn't really seem like they would be talking like that.
Yes, that's true. Mulan makes a comment about ripping off his balls or something at one point.
Yeah,
that felt kind of awkward as well.
Yeah. And it's like, the crazy thing is he is a really talented writer, and his comic stuff has proved that, I think, time and time again. Like, I've read most of his comic work. There's a couple I haven't quite gotten through, but it's all really well done, especially because, as we said before, he clearly has a love and like for the characters. But 90% of this is written extremely well, and I think would have been an incredibly entertaining movie.
Yeah. I think I would have much rather seen this version. Speaking of which, did you get the feeling that Ben Affleck was the concept for Britt Reid Jr.?
I honestly was kind of blasting through the comic, and I didn't think about it, but as soon as you said that immediately checks out in my head. Yeah,
he was. That's who I got the way he was drawn, which is kind of how the Jason Mewes character leaped out at me. And so in this story, after he retires years later, he's still running the paper. Mm-hmm. And then, Britt's older, he's graduated college, but he's just a party boy, very similar to how Seth Rogen's character took him at the beginning of that film, except in the comic here, he's a bit more physically capable given his background and, other elements. But then at a fundraiser for Scanlon, the corrupt DA, who's also a staple of the old show as well, and who also became the corrupt DA in the movie that Seth Rogen was in.
Oh, yeah, that was the same character.
There were some similarities. Yep.
Yeah, played by a young David Arbor.
Then that's who that was.
Yeah.
Okay. Oh, man, I had no idea. I should have known that.
Yeah, it's because he doesn't have the beard.
Wow, this guy looks so familiar. And they're hosting a fundraiser for him, and that's where we get the first appearance of the Black Hornet.
Which I really like as a villain. I like it. I love the idea of, and I know it's a little played out now because Marvel has done it so many times, but I love the idea of the villain being kind of the opposite of the hero for like the first outing.
That's my favorite sort of villain, man. I mean, I love Venom I love the Reverse Flash. Like, one of my favorite Batman villains is Wraith, who's like the reverse Batman. So that's my jam.
Yeah, and like Iron Man had Ironmonger, Captain America had the Red Skull. Like, it's like I said, Marvel I think has kind of ruined it at this point, but that's because it was like 10 years of them doing stuff like that. But I don't know when exactly this was written, but I think it still would have played back then. And because the characters are so similar, they literally are the two sides of a coin: the son of the hero, the son of the villain. I think it 100% works.
Yeah, and that plays into the theme of legacy as well. That is something I love in stories that clearly ties in here and in comics in general. Did you get a Rorschach vibe from his design? Like the scarf, I thought was interesting because there's never been a Green Hornet costume where he wore a scarf or ascot in that way, and that's what Rorschach. He looked a lot like Rorschach, but instead of a Rorschach mask, he had that black half-cracked mask.
Yeah, and I do kind of totally get that. He definitely has a Rorschach vibe. Also, the way the Hornet kind of wears a cape over a jacket in the book is kind of interesting.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure Alex Ross designed both costumes, which I'm glad you brought that up. I actually really like that. It was an interesting, almost like an Art Deco take on the old look. And I really liked their masks because they had those like pointed nose.
Yeah.
Both of them, Kato and the Hornet. And they had like the beehive eyes, but it didn't look goofy. That was the cool thing, both in how Alex Ross and Jonathan Lau drew the characters and painted them. It didn't look odd. It still looked pretty badass, which I thought was pretty cool too.
Yeah, and the Kato costume just feels like right out of the Matrix, and like with all the martial arts and stuff, that totally works.
Yep, that's a good pull right there. I agree. It was a very Matrix take on a chauffeur costume.
Yeah,
point.
But yeah, like I think like on the story wise and like character wise, I love the villain. I love the way it all kind of plays out. Like the way the dad of was it Hirohito is the name of the Black Hornet. How he's just kind of like, just leave it alone, just let it go. But he's too stuck up on the legacy.
Yeah. And that was just such like a very much like an elder to the younger, kind of like a Sonny Corleone to Vito Corleone from The Godfather, where the older one's like, don't take it personally, like this is just a distraction, like keep your eye on the prize. But the little one's more driven by his pride than anything else, which actually ends up being the undoing of the whole thing at the end.
Yeah.
Which I thought was an interesting, or not necessarily interesting, you see it a lot, but I liked that ends up being their undoing. And then so the Black Hornet kills the original Green Hornet at that moment.
Yeah, which is our catalyst that sends the hero on the journey. His dad dies, and that's also what prompts the old Kato to show up, which I love his introduction scene. I'd like to point out of when he shows up at the bar.
Yeah, very Mr. Miyagi helping Daniel-san in Karate Kid 1 in a lot of ways as well.
Yeah, because, Britt, he goes on this basically, like, destructive path of, like, I want to find out who killed my dad, and he's, like, hitting the bars, trying to be the tough guy, and he just pretty much gets his ass kicked at this bar as old Kato is just kind of sitting there to see what he's got, Yep.
And then Kato still has it, and he steps in to help him out with very minimal effort. I love Bruce Lee's take on Kato, so I would have been really curious to see who they were planning on casting. I wonder if that's something we can ask in one of the podcast Q&A type.
Oh, that'd be great.
Wonder, who you had in mind.
Yeah, because I don't even thinking now. I don't know who. Like Jet Li could do it now, just because he is older. But I don't know back then who it could have been.
That's a good idea. Yeah. Lee would be a good elder Kato. They were initially going to cast Steve. I think Steven Yeun, is that his name, from Kung Fu Hustle?
Oh,
Kato
okay.
in the Seth Rogen film, but that didn't end up working out.
I actually, as we said before, that we think Kato is kind of the better part of that movie. I actually did like the guy who was playing Kato.
Yes, I did too, but I think Steven Yeun would have done a little bit of a better job. He's a slightly better actor, in my opinion.
Yeah, he's great, and Kung Fu Hustle is so good. I've been meaning to rewatch it. It's on Netflix, and I haven't seen it since it came out.
Yeah, I got to find the time. I don't have time to rewatch stuff as much.
Yeah.
So what do we have then? So he dies, and that sends off the catalyst.
And then this is when Kato shows him that his dad was the Green Hornet, and he's basically like, I need to get you out of town.
the big reveal. I got to follow your father's orders by revealing to you that he was not the man you thought he was, and I'm basically shipping you off to China for your own protection.
Yeah, because one thing with the Green Hornet, which is an angle I like, is he's a hero, but they pose as villains, so everybody actually thinks they are villains. Which is, I can't think of another hero that's ever done that. I mean, I guess early Batman, there are some people who kind of treat him that way. Of like, oh, we don't really know, like, you know, street criminals at least don't really know what his deal is sometimes.
True, but, you know, he was never intentionally trying to pretend to be a villain. Yeah, I can't actually think of anybody else off the top of my head who's intentionally trying to pretend to be a villain either in order to be a hero.
Yeah.
That is an interesting take on things, which is, I think, part of what's made that character so endearing over all these years is that interesting twist.
Yeah, and the Seth Rogen movie attempts to kind of do that, but they don't really do much with it. This version does a little more with it, but I still think they could have leaned into it a little more.
I agree to that, too. I think they kept playing off the fact that there was just general confusion between the Black Hornet's activities and the Green Hornet's activities in the Kevin Smith version, and that kind of led to the is he a good guy or is he a bad guy versus him straight up saying, I'm here to, you know, be a bad guy.
Yeah, because a lot of the bad guys just refer to him as the Hornet. Sorry, I was just saying, like, a lot of the bad guys, like, they just kind of refer to the Hornet, and they don't specify color. Like, so it's like, oh, you know, they just know there's a guy called the Hornet out there causing trouble. So it's like both sides are kind of playing into the lore. Yeah.
I think I agree. I feel like that could have been fleshed out a bit more. Did he try to at least, like, I feel like at one point he attempted to sort of say, hey, I'm here to be the boss of bosses, but maybe I'm getting it confused with something else.
I think you're right. I think there was something in there about that.
Yeah. But yeah, I mean, overall, it was great chemistry between the two characters. I mean, there's that whole training. There's a training montage, and then there's the...
the training and costume montage.
Yeah, but even before that, he puts on his father's costume, right?
So they
take out somebody.
Yeah, they put him on the plane, and Mulan's like, well, we're going to go find your father's killers, and she's basically beating up people at a club, and he just, like, comes crashing through the window in the old uniform.
Yeah, we don't explain how he got off the plane or anything. He just sort of shows up.
Yeah.
And then he ends up doing okay.
Yeah.
Despite, you know, and he's wearing the dad's take, which is from the 60s show.
Mm-hmm.
And then that takes us into, well, now I'm going to try to carry on his legacy, being trained by the elder Kato.
Which is kind of my favorite part.
My conscience.
I love the scene where he's
think that
like,
is my favorite part.
Yeah, it's very much this kind of stuff hits me a lot harder. So me and my wife been trying to have kids, and so like anything with like parental stuff nowadays immediately makes me cry. Like I can't watch a Pixar movie at all without crying anymore. And I know you are a father.
Yeah, wait till you have kids. See what happens.
Oh god. But
watch a children's hospital commercial.
Oh god, I can't. I like everything now. Like yeah, but that scene where he's like, I didn't know my father, and this is my way to kind of get to know him and to honor him. Like, just like that little bit of dialogue is maybe my favorite page in the book.
Yeah, I like that. Like, he feels that his impression of him was wrong, and he actually was, like, a better man than he thought. So now he needs to, like, make up for the fact that he was kind of a dick to this hero.
Yeah.
Despite the hero, you know, keeping a big secret from him, which is not something that is necessarily a good thing, but I understand why, I suppose.
Yeah.
He did retire when he was a baby too, so it wasn't necessarily a significant portion of his life.
Yeah, and they do have there's some talking in the beginning of his wife and his mom talking about, oh, well, you're never going to tell him about it.
True, and to honor her, because then she passes away from cancer.
Yeah,
he keeps the secret too. That's true as well. Yeah.
Yeah.
What did you think of the costume montage?
So you told me something about this, and I was like, I kind of liked it. I thought it was a little fun, and in a sense, for some reason, I had Deadpool in my head of like the montage of that movie where he keeps changing his costume as he's going out for the first time. It's like, yeah, he wants to make the costume his own, and I know the one thing that you brought up that you were not a big fan of was there's a clear Batman '89 reference.
Yeah.
And it's definitely cringeworthy, but I kind of liked it.
So here's the thing. Here's my take. And I'm, as you've read in Identity Stunt, I'm a huge fan of Easter eggs and polls of stuff.
Yeah.
Again, this is more of like a personal pet peeve. For some reason, I don't like it when comic book superhero stories reference other comic book superhero characters as a fictional character as opposed to being, I don't know, like, I don't like when those worlds collide in that capacity. So if we were watching if we were reading a comic that wasn't the Green Hornet, it was just about something that was more like the Bourne Identity, and they had a Batman homage in that,
yeah,
I would have no problem. You know what I mean? But the fact that it was like the Green Hornet, which is kind of Batman-esque, directly homaging a scene from a Batman movie, I don't know why. I just didn't. I love the idea of that whole montage. Even if he had like quoted an action film or something, or one of the '80s films that Kevin Smith loves too, it would have sat better. I just didn't like that it was Batman '89 that was referenced.
I can 100% understand that. I definitely have nitpicky stuff like that kind of bugs me. That causes me to not like moments and things in movies. And like I said, it is cringe. It was kind of like, you did it because you're honoring, Batman that kind of like kick-started the comic book movie stuff, Batman and Superman. And obviously he's a big fan of that movie. He talks about it all the time. But for me, it's like, okay, okay, it's kind of funny to see it in the context of Green Hornet, but I was like, in a movie, I definitely would have been like, like you don't need that.
Yeah.
But,
and honestly, I would have liked it more if it just didn't use the exact dialogue from the film. I think that's really the problem. Like if it was a Batman-esque moment, like where he just said things that were Batman-like, that would have been fine. I think the fact that it was literally a word-for-word take from one of the opening scenes in Batman '89 is what I found most annoying. But I also liked that it lent into the idea that, a cape and a mask and in that sort of capacity wouldn't work very well, and that's what that moment was trying to demonstrate.
Yeah, like if they had just had a costume that was kind of reminiscent of the Bat costume and didn't do the dialogue, even that would be fine. Yeah, and I love the different attempts and like, he has like one that tries to fly and it doesn't work and all this stuff. And then it just settles on, just the classics. That's all I need.
Yep, just an updated look on the old one with the goofy hat.
Yeah, which there's a lot of talk about the goofy hat, which I kind of liked.
Yeah, I like that too.
Which was another grown Kevin Smith line of them referring to the hat as being pimp. But then I noticed they also do it in the Seth Rogen movie. Point. They said the same thing.
That's a good point, too. Yeah, that's true. That's a good point. That's a really good point.
Like, when they did it in the Rogen movie, I was almost wondering, like, is that a line from the TV show? Like, is that just something I didn't know about?
I don't think he ever said that pimp in the TV show.
I wouldn't think so.
No. I did like that he started using a mad as a hornet, mad as a goddamn hornet as kind of a catchphrase. I'm pretty sure that's new. Like, Kevin Smith added that. But then there was that other double-page spread where he's like, kung fu, bitches, and I was like, Arr.
Yeah. Which I'm fine with, like, because Britt Reid is, he's the younger Hornet. He's going to be a little crazier and more, like, the young guy in the costume being a little different with it is kind of fine by me.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, maybe I just don't. I feel like the exclamation comma bitches has been overdone. But again, depending on when this was written in script form, not even the comic, because the script was done for a few years before the comic was even started. So that's something else to consider.
Yeah. Which I would assume it'd have to be early 2000s because there's like YouTube references and stuff like that.
That's what I'm thinking too. Right around the time of Batman Begins.
Yeah, that's literally what I was thinking.
Yeah.
But yeah.
So then he's going through town trying to find the Black Hornet. He's, coming up against other criminals and saying, I'm looking for the Black Hornet. And the Black Hornet's killing those same guys.
Yeah.
Saying message received. And finally they cross paths at the mayor's party, at Scanlon's party.
Yeah, and they make it very clear that they know each other.
Yeah, a lot like the Spider-Man: Homecoming, where Michael Keaton and Peter Parker, the Vulture,
the best scene,
I guess, and Peter Parker have that conversation. Same idea, right? Where we don't both know.
Yeah, Because, like you said, it's very obvious. Like, oh, there's only one choice of who it could be. It's the person who's doing literally the same thing that I am.
Exactly. And then both kids could figure it out. And then I like that there was just a bigger picture the whole time, right? I mean, even talk about, they bring in the beginning that there's a big military contract in that town. I mean, you kind of forget about that. And then you find out towards the end that was the goal all along, and that they were using Hirohito's software development company to create the guidance controls for it, which are actually exterior to the bomber itself. And suddenly we've gone from street crime to sci-fi, The Dark Knight Rises type levels of drama within the city.
Yeah, and it's done really well. Like, escalation like that can sometimes be handled very poorly. Like, it's one of the things I like about, to bring up Spider-Man Homecoming again, is like the stakes for that movie are pretty small overall, where it's like he literally is just like defending his neighborhood. Like, he didn't stop the world from ending at the end of that first movie. But like the way this story, it's like, yeah, like you said, they're handling small crime, and then all of a sudden, oh no, like they're gonna nuke this city, and we're the ones kind of stuck in the position of we have to be the ones to stop them.
Yeah, and you're totally right. Sometimes escalation is handled very strangely, and so you can feel like, did somebody else write the climax of the script?
Yeah, like it wouldn't make sense for something small time to get this big, but this is a case where you totally see how they get from A to B to C.
Yeah, they did a really good job laying the seeds that there is enough munitions and tech stuff going on in this town that this sort of thing is viable, especially given that the guidance is just sitting in somebody's, home versus having to actually be piloted through the city. It reminded me a bit of the Dark Knight Returns comic, where, the first 2 issues or so is Batman just getting back on his feet, and then the final issue leads to Superman showing up, and then a nuclear bomb getting launched.
Yeah,
at Gotham, and nuclear winter, and Batman on a horse, and it was almost like a pretty significant escalation, but it totally fit.
Yeah, it makes sense,
especially when you find out that the Black Beauty also becomes what's it called?
The Stinger, I think.
The Stinger, which is a pretty cool name.
Yeah, it's pretty. It was actually decent, and it gave that character what was his name? Chase, not Chase. The mechanic's name. Clutch. Yeah, like it gave him okay, it's like this moment it kind of plants the seed, or that character plants the seed for this moment to be there. Yeah.
Yep, and that made it a bit more even as far as an aerial battle goes. And again, a surprise where it totally was allowed the hero to meet the escalation of the villain. And then they end up crashing into the Hirohito's condo, or his high-rise condo.
Yeah, it's like their company building that they claim is like a fortress in the middle of the city, and it's like a really fun action set piece.
Yeah, and I was really impressed. Again, it didn't feel too forced, and again, it made sense, and you could understand why that Scanlon was even involved with these guys. That he was getting money from those weapons contracts, but also by having this level of drama in his life, he gets more attention from his constituents.
Yeah, and people want to vote him in because it's implied that he's basically going to lose the bid for mayor, but this will help him win.
Yeah, and it totally worked.
Yeah.
I love on the final action sequence. Oh, go ahead.
I was going to say, 'cause I know I'm trying to rush through this because I know you're getting low on time, but the typewriter scene we totally kind of brushed over. And I was kind of curious what you thought about that. Because it's the top of the Sentinel, which is the newspaper that he owns. It has a giant working typewriter on their sign, and they get strapped to it as a death trap, and we see the mayor get crushed with it. Yes, and that's a very Batman 66 moment, though I'm fairly certain that was the deal in the TV show in the 60s as well, that they had a working typewriter on the roof. So I don't know that Kato and Green Hornet were ever strapped to it before, but I can't say that for sure. But I do know that we've seen that very thing in Batman 66. And I noticed that when they got out of that, it ended up destroying the top of the building,
which is also what happened in the Seth Rogen movie.
Yeah, it does. They totally wreck up that building in that movie.
Yeah, I mean, it didn't. I felt like it fit and it didn't fit. Like it was an awkward, anachronistic way of, this is a very technology-influenced story, and then suddenly the villain decides to strap them to a typewriter to smash them.
Yeah,
that was kind of weird, but it fits the theme of everything or the world we're in, I guess.
Yeah, there's a couple of moments throughout this thing where it's like this feels like Batman 66 smashed with Batman 89. But taking place in the 2000s.
That's a great way of looking at it. Yeah, with a little bit of Batman Begins sprinkled in. Yeah. I agree.
Because like it is a more serious take on the material, but there is also like some goofiness to it.
I totally agree, and that I think that's part of its charm was the lightheartedness. And it's comics, you always interject lightheartedness in dire situations. Mm-hmm. And there are these action sequences with Mulan taking on the Black Hornet's gangs, and we got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 panels of action.
Yeah, which is actually that's like I said, it's some of my favorite stuff. Like they do good storytelling through action, which some comics struggle to do.
Very much so. Very much so.
But I guess really to bring it up to the final moment, which is so they have their fight at the top of the building. Old Kato returns after possibly being killed earlier in the thing. He gets shot by the Black Hornet.
That part was a little confusing. I wasn't sure, like, where did he come from? Because even Hirohito seemed surprised. So I felt like that kind of got lost unless I read over it too quickly.
No, he does just kind of show up because they have the scene where the Black Hornet finds their lair and he shoots Kato, and then you just assume Kato's dead. But then he just like shows up at the end, and he's also the one that starts fighting the Black Hornet, which is a little weird. Because I'm like, oh well, shouldn't it be Britt's fight? Because usually you would put them up against each other, but it does like then all three of them jump in, and it's all of them fighting the Black Hornet together. So like, they kind of make it work, but it was weird that Kato was the one to kind of start it.
Yeah, but it in some ways it makes sense because he killed Kato's partner, and then it felt a little bit too like The Unforgiven, where Clint Eastwood comes back, that one last gunfight, and Kato asks for his mask back for that one last fight. So I really liked the drama in that moment.
Yeah.
But yeah, they did have to sort of just jump in for the sake of it in order to get Britt to fight.
Yeah. Which then leads to them.
End,
I'm curious here how you feel about this, because I kind of dig it.
I was okay with it. I was okay with it, man. It was very Kevin Smithy, but it harkened back to something in the beginning where Britt drops his pants and moons the press, and the father makes a comment about him never being able to keep his pants on or something like that.
Yeah.
And then that's what ends up being the doom of the Black Hornet is Britt taking off his pants. It just fit. It worked, and I was okay with it. Given the fact that we had seen Britt do enough at this point to prove himself physically.
Yes.
Which I would have been less okay with it had Britt been more like the Seth Rogen version, where he didn't really do much to prove himself until literally like the 1 minute sequence at the end of the film, which he still ended up fumbling at the end.
Yeah. That movie's so clunky. But yeah, like I said, to me it fits the character. Like he still is that goofy kid that was wasting his potential. It's just he's not wasting his potential anymore, but he's still a goofy kid.
Exactly. And it added to the fun lightheartedness of it. I think there was enough serious elements, and certainly on the villains, there was enough serious elements in the story where it was a decent balance. And maybe that was an issue I had with the movie we ended up getting, is there wasn't enough of that balance. It just felt too much like a couple of screwballs bumbling their way through. Whereas at least here he was trained by Kato,
Yeah.
In the Kevin Smith story. So
yeah, the Seth Rogen movie kind of just does feel like a Seth Rogen movie, and I'm like, this is not a good balance of tone for what this story should kind of be.
Yeah, I totally agree. And again, I'm not looking at Rogen's ability in comics. I enjoyed the Preacher show. I didn't love it, just despite it being my favorite comic book of all time. I felt they were hindered by the budget.
Yeah.
But I think he's doing a really good job with The Boys on Amazon, which is also heavily
Is that him?
deviates from the book, but in a more positive manner. Yeah, it's him and Goldberg doing
Oh, I
that
didn't know
too.
they were doing that. I have not watched that yet.
Yeah, and it's really good. I strongly recommend it. So again, I'm not knocking it. Clearly, he loves the genre. I just feel like somebody asked Seth Rogen, "Hey, we know you like comics. Do you want to write and star in the Green Hornet film?" And he was like, "Oh, I don't know much about the Green Hornet, but if that's my only comic book movie offer, then sure." You know what I mean?
Yeah, it definitely felt like when you look at Kevin's versus theirs, one of them had the passion for the character and one did not.
Exactly. Passion. That's
Yeah.
a great word to use to describe the difference.
Yeah, and honestly, something that has always bothered me about Kevin Smith, and it's kind of one of the things I'd always, if I ever was at one of these Q&As, would kind of hark on him about, is the way he says, "Oh, I'm not a good enough director to do that stuff." I completely disagree. I think he can be a good enough director, because some of the stuff he's done, I think, is extremely well directed, and the whole story was he wrote this, and then, quote unquote, he pussed out on directing it. I totally think he could do it, and I kind of wish he did, because I think as written as it is, it has its minor hiccups, but I think it would have been a really good movie.
Yeah, I agree. And unfortunately, I think it was his experience on Cop Out that scared him away from this. But I'm also wondering if, he's proven himself on Flash and Supergirl now as being able to handle action-oriented and character-driven stories. But I also wonder now with the technology of what they can do with special effects and fight sequences versus, 15 years ago, where now a lot of this could just be handled by a special effects team.
Yeah.
And some stunt people in front of a green screen versus having to actually go out and direct a lot of this stuff. I wonder if now he would have been more open to it. I mean, we're not going to get it at this point. But,
No.
Part of me always wonders if maybe he just got it a little bit too early.
I definitely think that is probably the case. I would like to, and like you said, Cop Out was such a horrible experience that he probably wasn't wanting to do another studio thing, and he hasn't really since.
Right.
So.
Right. No, in fact, he's not even doing regular movie distributions.
No, he's been his own man for a while now.
Right.
But yeah, I wish he would have done it. I would love to have seen it.
I mean, even if somebody else directed it, I remember when he first wrote Dogma, he wanted Robert Rodriguez to direct it, and Rodriguez was like, "No way, dude, you need to direct this." And then when he wrote the Superman Live script back in the
which I also
90s,
thought was really good.
Yeah, I like that one too. That was supposed to be a J.J. Abrams directed movie, or no, was it Tim Burton? That was supposed to do
It was Tim Burton. J.J. Abrams
Tim
later
Burton,
did
right.
a different one.
Yeah, he did a different take on it. But
Yeah.
He's okay writing, IP characters for other filmmakers to take. So, I mean, I would have been okay with, if not him, maybe Robert Rodriguez could have done this one.
Yeah,
Even got with Sin City, which was awesome.
Oh yeah, I love that movie. Even as a writer, I'd like to see him take a chance. I understand he wants to do his own stuff, and I totally respect that. But I would just love to see him actually give it a shot, because I do think it would be successful, based on his writing, and I would just love to see that success for him.
Yeah, I think he'd be surprised how many people would show up if it's his name on a comic book property. I think he's underselling himself, but yeah, I completely agree.
Yeah. Well, all right, man. I know we were kind of trying to hit a time here, and we went a little over, so I'm going to let you go. But this was really fun.
No worries.
Man.
This is a lot of fun.
Yeah, I'm glad we finally got to do it.
I completely agree. And if you're out there, world in the COVID, stuck at home in the COVID world right now, we strongly recommend you hop on Comixology, or even if you want to order the print versions, you can get the Green Hornet Omnibus Volume 1. And the first 10 issues are Kevin Smith's story, or they're online. But we strongly recommend it. If you're a fan of pulp heroes, the Green Hornet in general, or Kevin Smith in general, if you haven't read the story, it's definitely worth it. It's actually, in my opinion, a little bit better than the Batman stuff he wrote.
I will say this is the best comic he's ever done, I think. Like I said, I haven't read all of it. I read a good amount of it, though. The only thing I haven't gotten through is his Green Arrow. But out of his Batman and Spider-Man stuff and some of his other stuff, I think this is my favorite that he's done.
Have you read his first Daredevil, the Guardian Devil?
That's another one. I started it, but I kind of got caught up in some other stuff and never finished it. But I do remember enjoying what I read of that.
So yeah, I'm only going to disagree with you because I love Guardian Devil so much. It's my favorite Daredevil story of all time, and I would say that I like his Green Arrow a little bit more than this, but it's definitely in his top three for me. So, best of breed for Kevin Smith Comics is his Green Hornet run. But, man, you should check out, I strongly recommend you finish Guardian Devil.
Yeah,
that's a fantastic run.
I'm actually going to put that back on my iPad right now because I do own that on the Marvel app. So I'm going to get back to that.
There you go.
But as well, you also have a comic book for all the people sitting inside.
Oh, yes, I forgot about that. I do.
Yeah, go ahead and plug your own stuff, man.
Heavily influenced by Kevin Smith's writing, I must add. So I am the writer and creator of Identity Stunt, currently published by Marcosia Enterprises out of the UK. Volume 1 is available now. It received a lot of great reviews, gets a lot of great buzz in the indie world. I've made a lot of great friends.
I really enjoyed it as well.
Here. Thank you. Through the book. And, you can find it on anywhere graphic novels are sold or on identitystunts.com. It's about a Arab-American stuntman who's falsely accused of being a vigilante that nobody likes. So it's not like you're accused of being a Superman. We're like, oh, he's great. You're accused of being like
Booster Gold.
Rorschach. Speaking of Rorschach. Well, people do like Booster Gold has a charm.
Yeah.
Beatdown is charming in any capacity. Volume 1 is available now. And to that note, Volume 2 is currently in progress. I haven't been talking much about it because I learned some lessons from Volume 1, so I'm waiting until all of the art is complete before I say too much more.
Yeah.
But we are well underway. The scripts are written, and I would about half the black and white art is complete so far for all three issues. So, yeah, issue number 1 is going to be out in December of this year, and it is a Christmas-themed action tale.
Oh, that's awesome! I'm super excited. Yeah. I really enjoyed your book.
Thank you.
Yeah, we did kind of meet because of it. I think you were on a Kevin Smith podcast, and I heard you, and it was one of those things like, hey, you doing your thing inspired me to make my thing. And I don't know why. I just felt compelled because you dropped your Twitter name, and I just looked you up, and I was like, I bought your book, and I was just like, hey, man, like awesome. That's great. Good job. And then we just kind of became friends.
Thank you. Well, Kevin's inspired so many people in that way. I mean, his work, I've been following him since college. My girlfriend in college got me into his movies, and then, ever since. And his podcast especially, where he really, really encourages people to go out and create, and that's really what got me going out there. So the fact that I was able to then go on his show and not only announce my book like the week it came out, but also I gained, so many friendships because of that appearance. You especially, and I've got another book coming out that I haven't announced yet. I'll just tell you guys, it's called Altered Metal.
Altered Metal?
It should be out early next year. Altered Metal, yeah. I've already signed the contract, so I can't talk about it.
Awesome.
The artist is Jeffrey Woody, and I met him through that appearance on Kevin Smith's show, too. So it's definitely been the highlight of my comic book career and has opened many doors for me, and for that I'm forever grateful.
That's awesome, man. I can't wait to see your new book.
Yeah. Thanks. It's basically Apocalypse Now meets Robotech, so it's very
awesome.
Heavily sci-fi offshoot of a war film.
Oh, that is extremely my shit. So,
yeah, I'm excited. It's very different for me, so I look forward to getting a bit more out. We've got the outline ready now, and Jeff's been punching out a lot of concept art. So that's in progress, but not quite as in progress as Identity Stunt Volume 2.
Yeah, comics take a long time, it turns out.
Oh, yes. It's a very team-based effort, and, once your part's done, there's a lot of other pieces of the pie as well.
All right. Well, thank you so much for coming on. This has been one of the more fun episodes I've done in a while. So I'm glad we finally got to do this. And everyone, be sure to go check out his books. Oh, no problem, man. We'll definitely have to do this again. We'll cover the Bionic Man one at some point.
I was just gonna suggest that. I totally think that's the one we should do next because I've got a similar, younger ties to the old $6 Million Man show that's similar to the Green Hornet show. I think that'd be a good conversation for us.
Yeah, and again, that's one. It's like I have familiarity with it, but I've never crossed paths with it. So it'll be a similar setup for that one. So
nice. It's a date.
All right. Yeah, we'll figure it out. Well, I'm going to let you go. Right, thanks a lot, man. And everyone go be sure to check out his books and be sure to check out our next episodes.
Yeah, absolutely. I appreciate your time. And thanks, everybody. Catch you guys later.
All right. See you later.